My parents told me we were going on a short trip and then abandoned me for 10 years because of my stepsister's illness. When they tried to reconnect when I was 12, my mom and stepdad sat me down on the couch and told me we were going on a small journey. I didn't know what to think. Sure, life in our house wasn't perfect, but what 12-year-old assumes their parents are about to leave them? The memory of that day sticks with me like gum on the bottom of a shoe. So clear, it's as if my mind refuses to forget it. It was early summer, and the sun was intense when they dropped me off at my biological father's house. I recall sitting in the back seat, gazing out the window, feeling lost. My mom, Emily, kept turning around, offering what I now realize was a forced smile. "It's only for a little while, Jackson. Your dad will take good care of you," she reassured. A little while. Those words haunted me for years. The thing is, Ryan, my dad wasn't really involved in my life. My parents split when I was very young, and Emily married Ethan when I was around 6. From that point on, everything revolved around Ava, Ethan's daughter from another relationship. She was the golden child, and I was just there. Ava was always sick. I'm talking frequent hospital visits, doctors in and out of the house, and whispered conversations behind closed doors. No one explained what was wrong with her, just that she was fragile and needed calm. If she cried, everything in the house would stop. If she had a fever, Emily would stay by her bedside all night. I tried to understand, I really did. But I was a kid too, and no one stayed by my bed when I had nightmares, or when I had the flu. The drop-off was rushed. My stepdad, Ethan, stayed in the car, fiddling with his phone. My mom got out, walked me to the porch, and hugged me quickly, like she couldn't bear to hold me for too long. "We'll be back soon, baby, I promise," she said. Ryan opened the door, looking confused, as if he hadn't even known I was coming. I looked back at my mom, but she was already walking away. She didn't turn around, just got back into the car, and before I could say anything, they drove off. I stood there on the porch with just a small duffel bag filled with clothes and my favorite comic books, feeling empty. Ryan cleared his throat awkwardly. Come on in, Jack. I guess you're staying here now." Living with Ryan wasn't terrible, but it wasn't home. He was a mechanic, always with greasy hands, and the kitchen constantly smelled like oil and takeout. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't warm either. He didn't know how to raise a kid. "If you need anything, let me know," he'd mumble as he disappeared into the garage. The first few months, I kept waiting for my mom to call, for Emily to come back and get me, or for Ethan to show up with some excuse like, "Hey, we just needed time to sort things out." But the call never came. I quickly realized it never would. At 12, I couldn't understand why they left me. The silence was the hardest part. I'd cry myself to sleep some nights, clutching an old family photo like it was a lifeline. My mom's smiling face felt like that of a stranger. Ava was in the photo too, sitting on Emily's lap, looking pale but happy. I hated that photo. I hated her, and then I hated myself for hating her. Middle school was tough. I was the quiet kid, wearing secondhand clothes and always having a chip on my shoulder. I didn't make friends easily. Ryan didn't ask questions, and I didn't tell him anything. By the time I turned 16, I had built a wall so high around myself that even I couldn't see over it. Ryan and I barely spoke. I worked after school at a local burger joint, saving every penny. Ryan didn't ask for rent, but I kept my head down and stayed out of his way. I think he felt guilty, but he didn't know how to express it. At 18, I moved out. Fast forward to now. I'm 22, with a small apartment, a decent job managing inventory at a warehouse, and my best friend Mason, who has been by my side since high school. Mason's the kind of guy who'll show up with beer and say, "What's up, loser?" Just when you need someone. Life's not perfect, but it's mine. I have plans to go back to school part-time, and I'm even seeing someone, Olivia. She's smart, funny, and looks at me like I'm not just some broken puzzle piece that doesn't fit. For the first time, I feel stable. So when I got a message out of the blue from an unknown number that just said, "Jackson, it's your mom. Can we please talk? It's important," I froze. My mom. After 10 years of silence, I stared at my phone for what felt like hours. Mason noticed me zoning out. "Dude, you okay?" he asked. I showed him the message. He frowned. "What the hell does she want now?" "I don't know," I muttered, my fingers hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to delete it and pretend it never came. Another part, some foolish, wounded part of me, felt like that 12-year-old kid again, standing on the porch with a duffel bag. I finally typed a response. What do you want? The reply came almost immediately. It's about Ava. She's very sick. Please, Jackson, just meet with us. Avenue, that name hit me harder than I expected. Mason saw the look on my face. What's going on? He asked. I handed him my phone. He read the message and let out a low whistle. Man, after 10 years, now they want to talk. That's messed up. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the anger and confusion. What do they want? What does she want? And why, after all this time, is Ava suddenly a reason to come crawling back into my life? I don't know what made me agree to meet them. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a tiny broken part of me that still wanted answers. Whatever it was, I found myself sitting in the back corner of a grimy little diner 3 days later, staring at the door as if expecting a monster to walk through it. Mason didn't want me to go alone. They don't deserve this meeting, Jack, he argued, pacing around my apartment like a lawyer building his case. You owe them nothing. I just want to hear them out, I replied, though I wasn't even sure I believed myself. When Emily and Ethan walked into the diner, time seemed to stop. My mom looked older, her hair grayer than I remembered. The smile she gave me when she spotted me felt forced, like she wasn't sure she had the right to smile at all. Ethan trailed behind her, quieter than usual, avoiding my gaze. He looked smaller, like life had taken a toll on him. I didn't stand up. Jackson, my mom said softly as they reached my table. It's so good to see you. I didn't say anything, just motioned for them to sit. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought they might hear it. For a moment, the three of us sat in tense silence, the only sound being the hum of the old diner lights. Finally, I spoke. What do you want? Emily flinched but recovered quickly. We owe you an apology for everything. An apology. I let out a dry laugh. You dropped me off at Dad's house like I was a stray dog and never came back. 10 years, Mom. 10. You didn't call, you didn't write, you didn't even check if I was alive. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, staring at the chipped tabletop. My mom's hands trembled. We didn't have a choice, Jackson. You don't understand what it was like. Ava, I interrupted. There it was, the name again. The reason for everything. What about her? She's very sick, Emily said softly, looking up at me with glassy eyes. It's bad this time. The doctors don't think she has much longer. For a moment, her words hung in the air like a weight pressing on my chest. I didn't know how to respond. Was I supposed to feel sympathy? Guilt? I felt nothing. So what does that have to do with me? I finally said. Ethan spoke for the first time. We need your help. Help? I repeated, my anger flaring. You need me to comfort her? Be her long-lost brother after a decade of nothing? You think I owe you that? Emily shook her head quickly, her face crumbling. No, it's not like that. It's a little more complicated. She didn't explain, just sat there, eyes pleading, waiting for me to trust her. But I couldn't. Not yet. After what felt like an eternity, I stood up. If you want something from me, you're going to have to start telling the truth. Until then, I'm done here. Jackson, wait, Emily started, but I was already halfway out the door. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My mind was racing. Ava was dying. My parents were back. They wanted something from me, but they weren't saying what. I didn't know whether to be angry, sad, or just numb. Maybe all three. That night, Mason came over with a six-pack and his usual bad advice. So let me get this straight, he said, slouched on my couch, feet on the coffee table. They disappear for a decade, suddenly show up, and now they need your help because Ava's sick again? He cracked open a beer and handed it to me. And you didn't ask what kind of help? They wouldn't tell me. Just said it's complicated. Sounds like some manipulative crap to me, Mason said bluntly. You're not buying into this, are you? I took a sip of my beer, staring blankly at the wall. I don't know, man. Part of me thinks I should just forget the whole thing. But I don't know. I feel like there's something they're not telling me. Mason snorted. Of course there is. They've been lying to you your whole life. You think they're going to stop now? The next day I got another message from my mom. Please, Jackson, if you won't talk to us, can you at least come see Ava? She wants to meet you. She doesn't have much time left. Avenue, that name hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so many years resenting her, blaming her for everything that happened to me. But the truth was, She never asked for any of it either. She didn't ask to be sick. She didn't ask to be the center of the universe. And now she was dying. I couldn't ignore that. I didn't tell Mason or Olivia where I was going. I didn't want them to talk me out of it. The hospital was quieter than I expected. Sterile walls, muted voices. When I finally found Ava's room, I stood outside the door for a long time, my hand frozen on the handle. What was I expecting? Some heartfelt reunion? A tearful apology? I pushed open the door. Ava was sitting up in bed, staring blankly out the window. Her hair was thin and her face was pale, but she still looked vaguely like the girl I remembered from all those years ago. For a moment, I just stood there, unsure of what to do. She turned slowly to look at me, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" she asked. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I'm Jackson," I said awkwardly. "Your brother." "Well, stepbrother, I guess." Ava frowned like she was trying to piece something together but couldn't. "Oh," she finally said. "They told me you might come." She didn't sound excited. She didn't sound anything. "They said you wanted to see me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ava shrugged. "Not really. I didn't even know you existed until yesterday." "Yesterday." My stomach dropped. "What?" She turned back toward the window, her voice flat. "They never talked about you. Not once." Ava's words knocked the air out of me. They never talked about me. Not once. I didn't even know how to respond. My parents, my mom, had erased me from existence, like I was never there. I stood at the foot of her bed, my hands shaking as I shoved them into my pockets. They never mentioned me. Ava turned back to me, her pale face expressionless, but there was something in her eyes I couldn't quite read. "Number I only found out yesterday because Mom was crying about you." "Crying?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "That's rich." Ava tilted her head slightly, studying me like I was some unsolvable puzzle. "Why are you even here? They said you didn't want anything to do with us." "I don't." The words came out sharper than I intended. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. "Look, I didn't come here for them. I came here because they said you wanted to see me." "Well, I didn't," she said plainly. There it was, plain and simple. Ava looked out the window again, clearly done with me. I stood there for a moment, feeling like the world's biggest idiot. I didn't know what I was expecting. Some kind of bond, maybe, like we'd find some connection buried beneath the ruins of our messed up family. But I was wrong. Ava was just as much a stranger to me as I was to her. I turned to leave, muttering, "Goodbye, Ava." "Wait," she said suddenly, her voice softer. I froze and glanced back at her. "Why? Why did they leave you?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed my throat tight. "I don't know. You'll have to ask them." I didn't hear from my mom or Ethan for a couple of days after that, and honestly, I didn't care. I buried myself in work, trying to forget the whole mess, but Mason could tell something was off the moment he saw me. "You look like hell," he said, dropping into the chair across from me at the diner where I often grabbed lunch. "What happened?" "They never told her about me," I muttered, stirring my coffee. "Ava, she didn't even know I existed until 2 days ago." Mason blinked. "Wait, what?" I nodded, staring blankly at the tabletop. "They erased me, man. For 10 years, I was dead to them. Ava didn't even know she had a stepbrother." Mason let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Dude, this is messed up. Like next level messed up. What's their deal?" "I don't know, but something's off. There's more they're not telling me." "You think they're lying about Ava being sick?" he asked. I hesitated. "No, she looked bad, really bad, but there's something else. I can feel it." Mason leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Then find out. If they want you involved, make them tell you everything." That night, I caved and texted my mom. "Meet tomorrow. I want the truth." She replied almost instantly, "Of course, thank you, Jackson. We'll explain everything." The next day, I met them again, this time at a park. I chose a public place on purpose. I didn't trust them enough to be alone with them. They were already sitting on a bench when I arrived, looking as nervous as teenagers caught sneaking out. I didn't sit. I just stood in front of them, arms crossed. "Start talking, all of it." Emily opened her mouth, but Ethan beat her to it. "We messed up, Jackson. We know that, but Ava's illness, it was too much. The doctors, the hospital bills, it drained everything we had." I didn't say anything. I just stared at them, waiting for the real truth. Emily took a shaky breath. "After we left you, my father, your grandfather, passed away. He left us some money. Enough to help Ava for a while. The way she said it made my skin crawl. What does this have to do with me? I asked. Emily flinched again. We had to make choices, Jackson. You have to understand. Ava was so sick, and the money, my blood ran cold. You mean the inheritance? She nodded silently. And you spent it all on her? Ethan finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. We didn't have a choice. She needed treatments, experimental stuff. It was her only chance. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My grandfather, the man who used to take me fishing and tell me stories, had left me something, and they'd taken it. They'd spent it all on Ava. I took a step back, my hands balling into fists. So let me get this straight. You abandoned me, erased me from your lives, stole my inheritance, and now after 10 years you come crawling back because you need more? It's not like that, Emily pleaded, tears streaming down her face. We thought we were doing what was best. Ava needed us, and I didn't let her finish. My voice cracked, and I could feel the anger building in my chest. Years of resentment and hurt threatening to explode. I was 12, Mom. You didn't even look back when you drove away. Ethan looked down again, as if he couldn't bear to meet my eyes. We're sorry, Jackson. We are. But Ava is dying. She needs a bone marrow transplant, and you're her only match. The world tilted. Emily reached out, but I stepped back again. Please, Jackson, we wouldn't have come to you if it wasn't life or death. You're her only chance. I stared at them, my heart pounding in my chest. You abandoned me. You stole from me. And now you want my bone marrow? Neither of them said a word. I turned and walked away, their voices calling after me, but I didn't look back. When I got home, I slammed the door and sank to the floor, my head in my hands. They wanted this from me after everything. Mason showed up later, uninvited as usual, and found me sitting on the couch as still in shock. Jack, what happened? I told him everything. The inheritance, the transplant, the truth I'd finally dragged out of them. Jesus, Mason muttered, running a hand through his hair. So they stole your money, abandoned you, and now they want to take more from you. And for what? A girl who didn't even know you existed? She's dying, I said quietly. I don't know what to do. Yeah, well, where were they when you needed saving? He asked. I didn't answer. I just sat there staring at the floor, wondering how the hell I was supposed to make this choice. I barely slept that night. The words bone marrow transplant replayed in my head like a broken record. Every time I thought about it, a mix of anger and guilt clawed at my chest. They abandoned me. They stole from me. And now they wanted to take more. The next day, Mason was still pissed. You're not seriously considering it, are you? He asked as he scarfed down a bagel at my kitchen table. I shrugged. I don't know, man. She's dying. She didn't ask for any of this either. Mason slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. No, I'm not letting you do this. They're manipulating you, Jack. That's what they do. They don't deserve your bone marrow, your time, or even your pity. I knew he was right, but the guilt was harder to ignore. Over the next few days, my mom kept texting me. Please, Jackson, Ava's getting worse. She needs you. I tried to block it out. I buried myself in work, spent time with Olivia, anything to stop myself from spiraling. But it didn't help. Ava's pale face kept haunting me, and the weight of my decision pressed heavier on me each day. Finally, Olivia noticed something was wrong. You've been off lately, she said one night as we sat on her couch. What's going on, Jack? I hesitated, but I trusted her. So I told her everything. About my parents, about Ava, about the transplant. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I was done, she said softly, Jack, you don't owe them anything. Not after what they did to you. I know, I said, but Ava, she's innocent in all of this. She may be innocent, Olivia replied firmly, but your parents aren't. Think about what they're really asking of you. Do you trust them? That question stuck with me. Did I trust them? Not even a little. The next day, I decided I needed answers. Real answers. If I was going to make a decision, I had to know the full truth. So I went to the hospital to see Ava again. When I walked into her room, she looked up at me with tired eyes. You came back, she said flatly. Yeah, I muttered, sitting in the chair by her bed. There was a long silence between us, broken only by the hum of machines. Finally, I spoke. I need to ask you something. She sighed, turning to face me. What? What do you know? Everything about me. About why they left me? Ava's brows furrowed. Mom and Ethan just said you left because you didn't care about us. That's what they always told me. I froze, my blood turning to ice. What? They said you didn't want to deal with me being sick, that you were selfish. She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. I guess I believed it. Why wouldn't I? You were just gone. My hands curled into fists. I felt like the world was spinning out of control. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking. They abandoned me, Ava. They dropped me off at my dad's house and never came back. I was 12 inches. She looked back at me, her eyes widening. They never said that. Of course they didn't, I snapped. They lied to you, just like they lied to me. Ava stared at me for a long moment, processing what I had just said. Why would they do that? I leaned back, running a hand through my hair. Because they're selfish. Because they didn't want to take care of both of us. I was disposable. Ava swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. I didn't know. On my way out of the hospital, I ran into Grace, a family friend who had helped care for Ava over the years. I remembered her from when I was a kid. She was always around, babysitting or dropping off calls when Ava was in the hospital. Jackson, she said, surprised. I thought that was you. Hey, Grace, I muttered. She smiled sadly. It's good to see you again. I'm glad you're reconnecting with the family. I let out a bitter laugh. Reconnecting? Not exactly. She frowned. Well, at least you're here for Ava. I always thought it was wrong what they did. I froze. What do you mean? Her expression shifted like she'd said something she wasn't supposed to. Nothing. Forget it. No, Grace, tell me. She hesitated, looking around nervously. Finally, she sighed. When they sent you away, it wasn't just because of Ava. They didn't want you to know about the money, about the inheritance. My stomach dropped. What? Your grandfather left you a good amount of money, Jackson. Enough to help you go to college, get a fresh start. But Emily and Ethan took it. They used it for themselves, not just for Ava. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Are you sure? Grace nodded, looking at me with pity. I'm so sorry, Jackson. I thought you knew. I didn't know what to say. I stumbled out of the hospital, my mind spinning. All this time, I thought they'd spent everything on Ava's treatments, but they hadn't. They'd spent my money on themselves. When I got home, Mason was waiting for me. He took one look at my face and said, What happened? They stole everything, I whispered. It wasn't just for Ava. They took my money and used it on themselves. Mason's face darkened. I knew it. Those bastards, what are you going to do? I didn't answer. I just sat down on the couch, my mind racing. My parents had lied to me for 10 years. They'd stolen from me, abandoned me, and then had the audacity to ask for my bone marrow like I owed them something. Well, I didn't owe them a damn thing. The next day, my mom called again. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice shaking. Jackson, please. Ava's getting worse. We need you. She needs you. Let her die, I deleted the message. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel obligated. I felt done. I ignored my mom's messages for a week, not responding to her texts, calls, or the guilt-ridden voicemails she left daily. Each one sounded more desperate than the last, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Not anymore. Mason was right. They were manipulators. They always had been. For years, they twisted reality to suit themselves, painting me as the selfish one while they drained my inheritance and erased me from their lives. Now, they were trying to use Ava's illness to squeeze the last bit of humanity out of me, but I was done being their puppet. It wasn't easy, though. The guilt clung to me, whispering in the back of my mind like a voice I couldn't silence. What about Ava? She was dying, and no matter how much I resented my parents, it wasn't her fault. The problem was I didn't trust them, not one bit. Mason tried to talk me down one night while we sat in my apartment eating takeout. Jack, you don't owe them a thing. Bone marrow transplant or not, they threw you away. Now they're pulling every string they can because they know you're a good person. I scoffed, shoving a forkful of cold noodles into my mouth. Am I a good person? Wouldn't a good person let a sick girl die? Mason leaned forward, his expression dead serious. Don't let them make you responsible for her life. That's on them, not you. The next morning, I woke up to another message. But this one wasn't from my mom. It was from Grace. Jackson, I don't know if you're aware, but Ava's back in the hospital. Things are worse. I thought you should know. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone clutched in my hand. A part of me wanted to block the number, bury myself in work, and forget everything. But another part, some small, stubborn part of me, couldn't let it go. Ava didn't ask for this. She was sick. She was dying. And she'd never gotten a chance to know the truth. Maybe I couldn't save her, but I could tell her the truth about everything. I drove to the hospital that afternoon, my palms sweating the entire way. I couldn't shake the nerves that gripped me like a vice. What was I doing? Why was I here? When I walked into Ava's room, it felt like stepping into another world. Machines beeped softly around her, and she looked even frailer than before. Her skin was almost translucent, and her eyes were sunken with dark circles beneath them. She looked up slowly when I walked in. "You came back?" "Yeah," I said quietly, pulling up a chair beside her bed. There was a long silence between us, broken only by the hum of machines. Finally, I spoke. "I need to tell you something. The truth." Ava blinked at me, her tired eyes searching mine. "What truth?" I hesitated but knew she deserved to hear it. "About why I left, about why you didn't know I existed." She shifted slightly, wincing as she moved. "Okay." I took a deep breath, then told her everything. How our parents abandoned me, how they stole my inheritance, how they lied to both of us for 10 years. Ava didn't say anything at first. She just stared at me, her face pale and unreadable. Then she whispered, "They told me you left because you hated me, because I was sick." My heart clenched. That's not true. None of that is true." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just nodded, swallowing hard. "I believe you." I stayed with Ava for hours that day, talking quietly. She didn't have much energy, but she listened as I told her about my life, about growing up with our dad, about how I felt when they left me. I didn't sugarcoat anything. "I resented you for years," I admitted. "I blamed you for everything, but it wasn't your fault. It was theirs." Ava nodded slowly. "I think I always knew they were lying. I just didn't want to believe it." There was a long pause. She turned her head to look at me. Her voice was weak. Are you going to do it? The transplant?" I looked at her for a long moment, searching her face. "Do you want me to?" She shrugged slightly. "I don't know. I don't want to die, but I don't want you to do something you don't want to do." Her honesty hit me harder than I expected. I didn't answer her. I just squeezed her hand gently and told her to rest. I spent the next 2 days thinking. I avoided my mom and Ethan's calls. I even ignored Mason when he showed up at my door. I needed space. I needed to decide. Could I live with myself if I let Ava die? Could I live with myself if I gave in to my parents' manipulation again? On the third day, I made my decision. I walked into the hospital, straight past my mom and Ethan, who were waiting in the lobby. My mom jumped up when she saw me. "Jackson, oh, thank God." "Save it," I snapped. "I'm not here for you." I left her standing there, stunned, and walked into Ava's room. She looked up at me, surprised. "You came back?" "Yeah," I said softly. "I came to tell you that I'm not going to do the transplant." Ava blinked, her face falling. "Oh." I sat down beside her, my voice calm but firm. "It's not because I don't care about you. It's because I can't let them keep using me. They've taken everything from me, Ava. I can't give them this too." She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand. I wish things were different," I said quietly. "But they're not." Ava gave me a weak smile. "Thank you for telling me the truth, Jackson. You're the only one who ever did." I left the hospital that day feeling lighter than I had in years. My mom tried to call after me as I walked through the lobby, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I was free. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding my life. I spent more time with Mason and Olivia, and I finally started taking classes at the local college, just like I'd always planned. Ava passed away a month later. Grace called me to let me know. She said Ava had made peace with everything before the end. "She said you were the only family she ever trusted," Grace told me. I hung up the phone and cried. Not for my parents, not for myself, but for Ava, who never got the chance to live the life she deserved. I didn't go to the funeral. I heard my parents moved out of state afterward. I never spoke to them again. Some people might say I was selfish, but I don't see it that way. I chose myself. For the first time in my life, I chose to stop letting them manipulate me. And in the end, I think Ava understood that. I still think about her sometimes, about what might have been if we'd grown up together, if things had been different. But I can't change the past. All I can do is keep moving forward.